Life can begin to feel different long before anything in it visibly changes. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that draws attention from others, often not even in a way that feels explainable at first. What changes first is not circumstance, but orientation. The future does not disappear, but it loses its pull. Ambitions do not collapse, but they stop demanding energy. Desires do not vanish, but they no longer organize behavior. This shift is frequently misunderstood, both internally and externally. It is often misread as boredom, emotional numbness, loss of motivation, or a lack of purpose. None of these explanations are precise enough to describe what is actually happening. What is occurring is a psychological reorganization that precedes visible change. The psyche begins to withdraw energy from projections, from imagined outcomes, from futures that once carried emotional charge. This withdrawal does not feel like loss. It feels like neutrality. And neutrality can be unsettling in a culture that treats intensity as proof of meaning. Earlier phases of life are often structured around forward movement. Goals create momentum. Desire creates direction. Expectation creates narrative. When these elements soften, the absence is noticeable. People often say things like, "I don't feel driven anymore. Nothing excites me the way it used to. I know something is changing, but I don't know what." What tends to be overlooked is that excitement was never neutral. It was a compensatory force. Excitement pushed life forward when internal authority had not yet stabilized. It provided energy where structure was still forming. When structure begins to stabilize, excitement loses its function. This does not mean life is shrinking. It means life is reorganizing around something more internal. At this stage, effort begins to feel strangely unnecessary. Not because effort is wrong, but because effort no longer produces clarity. The mind may still attempt to force direction. Plans may still be made, but the emotional investment behind them weakens. This weakening is not failure. It is signal. The psyche is no longer willing to be driven by imagined futures alone. A subtle realism enters. Not pessimism, not resignation. Realism. Time begins to feel different. Not scarce, not urgent, but shaped. Decisions are no longer evaluated primarily by how much they expand life. They are evaluated by whether they fit. Fit replaces possibility as the organizing principle. This shift can feel disorienting because possibility had previously provided orientation. Without it, there is a temporary absence of direction. This absence is often mislabeled as being lost. In reality, it is a suspension. The psyche pauses expansion in order to recalibrate. During this phase, familiar motivations no longer work reliably. What once pushed you forward now feels hollow. What once felt meaningful now feels thin. People often try to correct this by adding stimulation. New goals, new plans, new environments. Sometimes this works briefly. More often it doesn't, because the issue is not lack of stimulation. It is lack of alignment. The psyche is no longer responding to external incentives in the same way. Its center of gravity is shifting inward. This is why certain forms of advice feel irrelevant during this period. Advice assumes a direction is missing and needs to be supplied. Here, direction is withdrawing on purpose. The psyche is refusing to move forward under old terms. Another common misinterpretation is burnout. Burnout implies exhaustion from overuse. But in this phase, energy is not depleted. It is withheld. There may still be capacity. There may still be competence. There may still be opportunity. What is missing is compulsion. And compulsion was never neutral either. Compulsion kept life moving when inner authority was still externalized. It relied on approval, expectation, and imagined outcomes. When inner authority begins to consolidate, compulsion becomes intrusive. The psyche stops cooperating with it. This can create a sense of friction with the world. Externally, expectations may remain unchanged. Internally, tolerance for those expectations decreases. You may notice yourself questioning why certain efforts are required at all, why certain goals still matter, why certain roles still deserve energy. These questions are not philosophical exercises. They arise spontaneously. They are not asked to be answered immediately. They are asked to dissolve false obligations. This is where many people attempt to reassert control. They double down on discipline. They force consistency. They try to recreate earlier intensity. Often, this produces a feeling of strain rather than progress, because the psyche is not resisting effort itself. It is resisting misaligned effort. Another signal of this phase is a change in how time is experienced. Earlier, time was something to be filled. Now, time becomes something to inhabit. Empty time no longer feels like wasted time. It feels necessary. Periods of inactivity may increase, not passivity. Inactivity. This is not avoidance. It is digestion. The psyche is processing accumulated experience. During earlier phases, experience was gathered rapidly. Lessons were often postponed. Integration was delayed. Now, integration demands space. This is why distractions lose appeal. Not because they are judged, because they no longer satisfy. The nervous system begins to prefer coherence over stimulation. This can be misread as emotional flattening, but emotional flattening is marked by disengagement. Here, engagement is still present. What changes is intensity. Intensity was previously required to hold attention. Now, attention stabilizes without it. This stabilization alters relationships as well. Interactions based on momentum, drama, or future promises lose energy. Relationships rooted in presence and reality remain. This can feel like social contraction. In truth, it is refinement. The psyche is reducing noise. Another important aspect of this phase is a change in how success is perceived. Success no longer feels like accumulation. It feels like coherence. Achievements may still occur, but their emotional payoff diminishes. This is not dissatisfaction. It is proportionality. Earlier, achievement compensated for internal uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is decreased, so achievement loses its psychological leverage. This is why praise can feel oddly irrelevant during this stage. Not offensive, just insufficient. External validation no longer organizes self-worth. This can appear confusing to others. From the outside, nothing may appear wrong. From the inside, something fundamental is shifting. The danger here is premature interpretation. When meaning temporarily thins, the mind rushes to explanation. Depression, failure, loss of purpose. These explanations are compelling because they are familiar, but they miss a crucial distinction. Loss of meaning feels heavy. This phase feels quiet. Loss of purpose feels distressing. This phase feels neutral. Loss of direction feels chaotic. This phase feels suspended but stable. Stability without direction is unfamiliar, but not pathological. It indicates that the psyche is reorganizing its hierarchy. Older motivations are being retired. New ones are not yet visible. This gap is uncomfortable only if it is rushed. The psyche does not respond well to being hurried during reorganization. It requires patience without demand. Not patience as a virtue, patience as a condition. Life may appear to slow externally as well. Opportunities may pause. Momentum may soften. This is often interpreted as stagnation. In reality, outer life frequently mirrors inner shifts. When inner compulsion withdraws, outer acceleration loses its engine. This does not mean progress is stopped. It means progress has changed form. Instead of expansion, there is consolidation. Instead of acquisition, there is differentiation. Instead of forward motion, there is grounding. This grounding is subtle. You may notice increased sensitivity to misalignment. What once felt tolerable now feels intrusive. What once felt necessary now feels excessive. This sensitivity is not fragility. It is refinement. The psyche is becoming more precise about what it will carry. This precision is often mistaken for pickiness or withdrawal, but it is structural. The inner system is recalibrating load. What fits remains. What doesn't quietly falls away. This process is rarely linear. There may be moments of restlessness, moments of doubt, moments of attempted return to old patterns. These attempts usually feel unsatisfying, not painful, just inaccurate. The psyche no longer believes the old story, and once belief dissolves, performance becomes difficult. This is why pretending feels exhausting during this stage. Roles that once felt natural now require effort. Effort without meaning is draining. This is not moral judgment. It is energetic truth. The psyche conserves energy when it senses impending reorganization. It does not want to invest in structures that are dissolving. This is the quiet intelligence of the system. It protects itself from fragmentation. At this stage, the most important realization is often overlooked. Nothing is wrong. The absence of urgency does not indicate collapse. The absence of desire does not indicate emptiness. The absence of ambition does not indicate failure. It indicates that life is no longer being driven by fantasy. Fantasy had served its purpose. It carried the psyche through earlier phases of growth. Now, fantasy gives way to reality. Reality is quieter, more limited, more grounded, and paradoxically, more livable. This is where many people feel a strange sense of calm without clarity. Calm without answers feels unsettling to a mind trained to equate clarity with safety. But here, calm is a safety. The psyche has stopped fighting itself. That cessation is the first sign that something fundamental is shifting, not outwardly, inwardly. And that inward shift does not demand interpretation yet. It only demands recognition. This phase does not announce outcomes. It announces readiness, not readiness to act, readiness to reorganize. And that reorganization has its own pace. It cannot be accelerated. It cannot be forced. It unfolds as structure replaces compulsion. This is a quiet condition that precedes major change, not a warning, not a promise, a reconfiguration already underway. And recognizing that reconfiguration, without trying to find it prematurely, often brings an unexpected sense of stability, not because the future is clear, because the psyche is no longer divided. That division had been exhausting. Its resolution does not feel exciting. It feels accurate. And that accuracy is what allows the next movement of life to form without force. As the internal reorganization deepens, changes begin to appear in how time is experienced, not in how it is measured, in how it is felt. Time no longer presses forward with the same insistence. It does not rush. It does not pull. Instead, it becomes present. This presence is subtle but unmistakable. Earlier phases of life tend to treat time as a resource to be managed, something to fill, something to optimize, something to stay ahead of. In this phase, time stops feeling like something to conquer. It becomes something you are already inside. This alters behavior without requiring decision. You may notice fewer attempts to multitask your life, less tolerance for fragmentation, less willingness to scatter attention across too many directions. Not because focus is improved, because division feels heavier. Earlier, division felt normal, even productive. Now, divided attention produces strain. The psyche is no longer willing to be everywhere at once. This change is often misinterpreted as loss of energy. In reality, it is redistribution. Energy is no longer spent maintaining multiple provisional identities. It is being reclaimed. This reclamation affects effort directly. Effort begins to feel different. Earlier, effort was fueled by urgency, deadlines, expectations, imagined consequences. Effort created momentum even when clarity was absent. Now, effort requires alignment. When effort is misaligned, resistance appears quickly, not dramatic resistance, subtle resistance. Procrastination increases. Enthusiasm fades. Tasks feel heavier than they objectively are. This is often interpreted as laziness, but laziness implies avoidance. Here, avoidance is not the core issue. The issue is that the psyche no longer lends energy to actions that lack internal coherence. It is not refusing work. It is refusing distortion. This is why forcing productivity during this phase often backfires. More pressure produces less movement. More discipline produces more friction. The psyche is signaling that its relationship to responsibility is changing. Responsibility itself is not rejected. What is rejected is responsibility based on outdated assumptions. Earlier, responsibility often meant obligation to external structures, roles, expectations, timelines that were never consciously chosen. Now, responsibility becomes more selective. You may notice an increased sensitivity to what genuinely belongs to you and what does not in a moral sense, in a structural sense. Some responsibilities still feel solid, others feel strangely artificial. This differentiation is not intellectual. It is felt. The body responds differently. Attention either settles or disperses. This bodily signal becomes more reliable than rational justification. This is another reason the phase is misunderstood. Modern frameworks privilege conscious reasoning. Here, reasoning loses authority. The psyche has shifted decision-making lower, into sensation, into proportion, into felt coherence. This does not mean decisions become impulsive. They become grounded. You may also notice changes in pacing. Earlier, speed was often equated with progress. Faster movement meant forward movement. Now, speed loses its psychological value. Slowness does not feel like failure. It feels accurate. Not all slowness, only the kind that arises naturally. This is an important distinction. Forced slowness feels restrictive. Natural slowness feels stabilizing. The psyche is recalibrating tempo. This recalibration affects how the future is imagined. Earlier, the future functioned as motivation. Goals pulled you forward. Plans organized behavior. Now, the future loses some of its gravitational pull. This does not mean the future disappears. It becomes neutral. Plans may still exist, but they are lighter. They no longer carry identity. You may notice less emotional attachment to outcomes. This is often mistaken for detachment. But detachment implies withdrawal from life. Here, engagement remains. What disappears is overinvestment. Overinvestment was a strategy. It compensated for inner uncertainty. When inner authority stabilizes, overinvestment becomes unnecessary. This change can be unsettling. Without overinvestment, life feels less dramatic, less charged, less urgent, but it also feels less exhausting. You are no longer constantly preparing for hypothetical futures. Preparation gives way to responsiveness. Responsiveness does not require anticipation. It requires presence. This presence alters how responsibility is carried. Earlier, responsibility was often future-oriented. I must do this so that I need to prepare for. Now, responsibility becomes immediate. What needs attention now receives it. What does not, recedes. This simplification is not deliberate. It emerges spontaneously. The psyche is no longer interested in carrying unnecessary weight. This also affects how mistakes are experienced. Earlier, mistakes were threats to trajectory. They implied derailment, loss of momentum. Now mistakes feel contextual, not minimized, but not catastrophic. They are integrated more easily. This is because identity is no longer built around progress alone. When identity is less invested in outcome, errors lose their power to destabilize. This does not lead to carelessness. It leads to realism. Realism reduces anxiety. Anxiety thrives on imagined futures. As those futures lose emotional charge, anxiety quiets. Not completely, but significantly. This quieter internal environment allows another shift to occur. Attention becomes more discriminating. You may notice less tolerance for superficial engagement, less interest in performative interaction, less patience for conversations that orbit without contact. This is not cynicism. It is selectivity. The psyche is conserving energy for what feels real. This selectivity can feel isolating at first. Social patterns may shift. Some connections may weaken, not because conflict occurs, because relevance changes. Relevance is no longer defined by shared momentum. It is defined by shared reality. This is a subtle but important difference. Momentum-based relationships require constant movement. Reality-based relationships tolerate stillness. As stillness becomes more present internally, relationships that cannot hold begin to fade. This fading often happens quietly, without confrontation, without explanation, which can be confusing to both sides. But it is not abandonment. It is reorganization. Another area affected is the relationship to authority. Earlier, authority often lived outside, in systems, in expectations, in external validation. Now authority moves inward, not as confidence, as stability. You may notice less need for reassurance, less urgency to be seen, less desire to prove. This does not mean invisibility is preferred. It means visibility is no longer required to confirm existence. This is a profound shift. Much of earlier striving was about confirmation. Am I on the right path? Am I doing enough? Am I becoming what I should? These questions lose intensity, not because they are answered, because they lose relevance. The psyche no longer frames life as a test. This is another reason effort reorganizes. When life stops feeling like a test, effort loses its defensive function. You are no longer trying to pass something. You are participating in something. Participation does not require urgency. It requires presence. This presence changes how challenges are met. Challenges no longer feel personal. They are not interpreted as judgments. They are conditions. This reduces emotional reactivity, not through suppression, through proportion. When everything is no longer about becoming, challenges stop threatening identity. They become situations to be navigated. This navigation is calmer, not detached. Calmer. Another subtle change appears in how satisfaction is experienced. Earlier, satisfaction was tied to completion, to achievement, to resolution. Now, satisfaction emerges from coherence. Things feel right or wrong more than successful or unsuccessful. This shift can feel unfamiliar. There may be moments of wondering whether something is missing, especially if life appears externally similar. But internally, something essential has changed. The psyche is no longer driven by anticipation. Anticipation was a powerful motivator. It kept life moving forward, but it also kept life slightly ahead of itself. Now, anticipation relaxes. This relaxation can feel like emptiness at first, but it is not emptiness. It is space. Space allows integration. Integration requires time without pressure. This is why rushing this phase creates distress. The psyche is attempting to establish a new equilibrium. That equilibrium cannot be forced. It emerges as old organizing principles dissolve. Effort, time, and responsibility are no longer aligned with expansion. They are aligning with habitation. Life is no longer something to be built endlessly. It is something to be lived. This is not resignation. It is recalibration. The psyche is shifting from growth through accumulation to growth through depth. Depth requires boundaries. Boundaries require selectivity. Selectivity reduces speed. This is a chain that often confuses people. Slowness is mistaken for regression. In truth, it is structural necessity. You cannot inhabit something that has no shape. Earlier, life was shapeless by design. It allowed experimentation. Now, shape becomes necessary. This shape is not imposed. It emerges naturally as certain possibilities close. Closure is often feared. But here, closure feels stabilizing. Not everything needs to remain open. When too much remains open, life becomes abstract. This abstraction was tolerable earlier. Now, it becomes uncomfortable. The psyche seeks concreteness. This concreteness changes how effort is applied. Effort becomes localized. You are no longer trying to improve everything. You are responding to what is directly in front of you. This localization reduces overwhelm. Overwhelm relied on infinite possibility. As possibility narrows, overwhelm recedes. This does not eliminate complexity. It makes complexity manageable. Time is no longer something you chase. Effort is no longer something you force. Responsibility is no longer something you carry indiscriminately. All three begin to align around reality rather than fantasy. This alignment feels quieter, but it is also more stable. Stability does not announce itself. It is felt as absence of strain. That absence can be surprising. Many people have lived with constant strain for so long that its absence feels unfamiliar. They wonder if something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. Something is settling. And that settling is not the end of movement. It is the end of unnecessary movement. Life has not stopped. It has stopped being pushed. This is the crucial distinction that often goes unnamed. When effort reorganizes, when time becomes inhabited rather than managed, when responsibility aligns with inner authority, The psyche reaches a point of relative equilibrium, not resolution. Equilibrium. This equilibrium does not produce excitement. It produces calm accuracy. And accuracy is what allows the next phase of life to emerge without distortion, not faster, not louder, but truer to the structure that is now in place. That is the quiet transformation underway here. Once the internal reorganization stabilizes, life does not suddenly accelerate. There is no surge of clarity, no dramatic revelation, no moment that announces completion. What arrives instead is inhabitation. You begin to live inside your life rather than ahead of it. Earlier phases were defined by projection. Life was something you were moving toward. Meaning was something expected to appear later. Now, that orientation dissolves. The future no longer organizes the present. The present becomes sufficient to stand on its own. This does not feel triumphant. It feels grounded. The psyche has stopped overreaching. That cessation changes everything, but quietly. One of the first noticeable shifts is how effort feels when it is no longer forced. Effort does not disappear. It becomes proportional. You still act. You still decide. You still engage. But action is no longer driven by urgency. There is no internal voice pushing you forward out of fear of falling behind. This absence of pressure can feel unfamiliar. Many people mistake pressure for momentum. Without it, they wonder if something has been lost. What has been lost is not drive. What has been lost is distortion. Earlier, effort often compensated for internal fragmentation. Action was used to outrun uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is softened, not resolved. Softened because identity is no longer dependent on outcome. This creates a subtle but profound stability. You are no longer proving that your life is valid. You are living it. Living requires less justification. This affects how choices are made. Decisions no longer carry existential weight. They are not interpreted as defining moments. They are simply choices. Some matter more than others. But none are expected to resolve everything. This reduction in expectation relieves pressure. Life stops feeling like a series of turning points. It becomes a continuous process. This continuity allows presence to deepen. Presence is not something you practice here. It emerges naturally. You are no longer pulled away from the moment by anticipation or regret. The past has already been integrated. The future has lost its demand. What remains is contact. Contact with what is happening now. This contact is not intense. It is steady. Steadiness replaces excitement as the dominant tone. This does not mean joy disappears. Joy becomes quieter, less reactive, more stable. Earlier, joy depended on events, on progress, on validation. Now, joy appears as a byproduct of coherence. When inner conflict reduces, emotional life stabilizes. You may notice fewer emotional extremes, not because you are numb, because you are no longer swinging between projection and disappointment. Emotions still arise. They pass through more cleanly. This clean passage is a sign that the psyche is no longer congested. Congestion came from carrying too many unfinished narratives. Now, many of those narratives have dissolved, not resolved. Dissolved. They no longer demand completion. This changes how identity is experienced. Earlier, identity was something you were building. Now, identity feels more like something you are inhabiting. It is less performative. You are no longer trying to become someone. You are being who you are. This being is not fixed. It is stable enough to move without anxiety. Movement now comes from necessity rather than ambition. Necessity is quieter than ambition, but it is more reliable. Ambition required constant fuel. Necessity moves on its own. This is why action during this phase often feels simple. Not easy. Simple. Complexity remains, but it is no longer overwhelming. The psyche is no longer trying to manage infinite possibility. It is responding to concrete reality. This concreteness changes how meaning is experienced. Meaning no longer arrives as inspiration. It appears as fit. Things feel right or wrong, not exciting or boring. This shift can be difficult to articulate. People often ask, "Are you happy?" The question itself feels imprecise. Happiness implies a peak. This phase is not about peaks. It is about stability. Stability allows life to be lived without constant evaluation. You stop monitoring yourself as closely. You stop asking whether you are progressing fast enough. You stop measuring yourself against imagined trajectories. Measurement loses relevance when direction stabilizes. This is another sign that the psyche has settled into itself. Settling does not mean stagnation. It means that movement now happens within a structure rather than toward one. Earlier, the structure was imagined. Now it is embodied. This embodiment is felt physically as well. Tension reduces. Breath deepens. The body feels less mobilized, not relaxed in a superficial sense. Anchored. The nervous system no longer needs to stay alert for future threats. This reduces background anxiety. Anxiety does not disappear completely, but it loses its organizing role. Earlier, anxiety drove action. Now, it appears occasionally and passes. It no longer dictates behavior. This change is significant. When anxiety no longer organizes life, clarity improves. Not clarity about the future. Clarity about what is unnecessary. Many things fall away without conflict. Habits, expectations, certain social obligations, not because they are rejected, because they are no longer required. This shedding is quiet, often unnoticed until later. You may look back and realize how much has changed without effort. That realization can be surprising, especially if you expected transformation to be dramatic. Here, transformation is understated. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself in absence. Absence of strain. Absence of compulsion. Absence of overthinking. This absence creates space. Space allows life to unfold without being managed constantly. Management was necessary earlier. Now, it becomes interference. This is why control feels heavier during this phase. Not because you are incapable, because control is no longer aligned with how the psyche is operating. The psyche trusts its own structure now. That trust reduces the need to supervise every outcome. You may notice increased tolerance for uncertainty, not resignation. Tolerance. Uncertainty no longer feels threatening. It feels neutral. This neutrality is important. It means that meaning is no longer outsourced to resolution. Life does not need to arrive somewhere to be valid. It is valid as it is unfolding. This realization does not come as a thought. It is felt as a reduction in urgency. Urgency was never neutral. It kept life moving when internal coherence was still forming. Now that coherence exists, urgency becomes disruptive. This is why you may feel resistant to environments that demand constant acceleration, not because they are wrong, because they are mismatched. The psyche now prefers depth over speed. Depth allows for sustained engagement. Speed fractures attention. This preference influences choices quietly. You may find yourself drawn to fewer commitments, but you engage more fully with those you keep. This fullness replaces breadth. Earlier, breadth was valuable. Now it feels diffuse. This is not a loss of curiosity. It is a refinement of interest. Interest now arises from resonance rather than novelty. Novelty stimulated earlier phases. Now it distracts. Resonance sustains attention. This shift also changes how you relate to goals. Goals still exist, but they no longer define you. You can pursue something without needing it to justify your existence. Failure loses its existential weight. Success loses its intoxicating effect. Both become experiences rather than identities. This balance creates emotional resilience, not toughness. Resilience. You are less shaken by outcomes. Not because you care less, because your sense of self is no longer attached to them. This detachment is not indifference. It is proportion. Proportion allows meaning to stabilize. Meaning no longer swings wildly. It settles. This settled meaning is not verbal. It is lived. You live in a way that feels consistent. Consistency does not require constant effort. It emerges naturally when internal conflict reduces. This reduction is a true marker of completion, not achievement, not recognition. Completion of an internal reorganization. Once this completion occurs, life does not suddenly become simple, but it becomes inhabitable. You are no longer living in anticipation of yourself. You are living as yourself. This distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. Earlier, life was something you were becoming. Now, life is something you are. This is why the phase does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary. Ordinariness is often mistaken for stagnation, but this ordinariness is not empty. It is stable. Stability allows growth without distortion. Growth now happens quietly, not as expansion, as deepening. Deepening does not announce itself. It unfolds over time, without urgency, without force. This is the final realization of this phase. Nothing needs to be pushed. Nothing needs to be chased. Nothing needs to be proven. Life has settled into a shape that can be lived without constant correction. That shape may still evolve, but it no longer needs to be imagined. It is already present. And living inside that presence is not exciting. It is accurate. Accuracy is what replaces intensity, and accuracy is what allows the next phase of life to unfold without resistance. What has been described throughout this video is not a dramatic turning point. It is not a breakthrough moment. It is not an awakening scene. It is not the beginning of something loud or urgent. It is the quiet completion of an internal movement that has already been underway. Nothing in this phase demands recognition from others. Nothing requires explanation. Nothing needs to be confirmed. The shift happens without witnesses. Life does not change direction suddenly. It stops being pulled forward by fantasy. And in that absence of pulling, something steadier takes its place. You begin to live without negotiating with imagined futures, without rehearsing versions of yourself, without needing momentum to justify your existence. This is why the phase can feel ordinary. Ordinary does not mean empty. It means inhabitable. The pressure to become dissolves. The need to arrive fades. The constant internal motion settles. Not because you have reached an end, but because you no longer need to outrun yourself. What follows this stage is not something that can be predicted. It cannot be visualized clearly. It cannot be rushed into form. It emerges naturally from the structure that is just stabilized. And that structure does not announce itself with excitement. It announces itself with accuracy. If this video resonated, it is not because something new was introduced. It is because something familiar was named. Something you may already be living, but had not yet recognized as meaningful. There is nothing here to act on, nothing to fix, nothing to apply, only something to notice. And noticing it is often enough.